Okay, good morning, everybody. It is Saturday, September the 24th, about 11 o'clock a.m. This is meteorologist Shay Gibson with Weather Flow. I'll be right back with you. I've got to get out and share this out to a couple of other groups. So stay put, and I'll let some of the others join in on the live event, and we'll start talking tropics here momentarily. So give me about 1 minute, and I'll be right back. Okay, everyone, thank you for your patience there. Make sure I know my volume is working. I can see it working, but I just want to make sure you can hear it. So give me some feedback if you could. I'm going to go ahead and take the standby down and we'll get started. So pretty active tropics season right now, as we would expect during our peak hurricane month of the year, right? Peak date was September 10th. That doesn't mean that things go down. And we'll show you the graph in just a moment. First, let me get myself out of the screen over to the corner. And you can see right now we're watching 5 different systems, and with the focus being on Ian for right now for the East Coast. So Fiona is racing off to the north over Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, over the Labrador Current, and so it's become post-tropical or extratropical. Looking at another wave off of Africa that has a low 20 to 30% chance, 20% chance next 48 hours, and 30% chance next 5 days. This one is really more of an open wave, doesn't really show much promise. But then we do have Hermine off the coast of Africa going abnormally north. This normally doesn't happen. Usually they head off to the west, but the steering currents are such that it's going to head to the north and likely weaken into a tropical depression. So not much to worry about there. Maybe the Canary Islands if some of the outward swells reaches that, and some of the rip currents and whatnot, but not much to talk about. With Gaston nearing the Azores, this is going to continue to drift off to the east and eventually weaken into a tropical depression again. So again, this one not really a threat to land other than where the shipping industry goes through. Not much to worry about there. Let's go over to, let me go back to Fiona because Fiona is really it's really producing a whopping to these areas up in Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, and even expanding northward up into Canada as well. And this system really has been impressive to watch. If you look out on a visible satellite, it was a hurricane. It was a major hurricane just a couple days ago. And as it went north over the warmer waters, just to the north of the Gulf Stream in Bermuda, it continued to hold a Category 3. Then it finally weakened to 2. And as it hit these colder waters over near Nova Scotia, it really blew up, and you can see the cloud tops really racing off to the north and the northeast. You can see how expansive those clouds are as they shoot off to the northeast here. Let me get my draw tool up. I had it up and running. There we go. So this is typically what happens when you have a warm system, a warm tropical system hit these cooler waters of the Labrador Current. What happens is you get a lot of colder air starting to draw in down from the north. If I can get this draw tool to work here. Nope, it's not going to work for me. So, all right, I'm going to pull that off screen. Anyway, so the air comes down from the north along the western quadrant of the storm, and you can see it recycling and going back up and around it. And you can actually see gravity ripples on the northeast quadrant, which represents cooler air racing over the warmer air below it. And so that creates kind of waves in the atmosphere, like waves of the ocean. And I imagine that probably looks like some of those asperatus clouding from below. But man, I tell you what, the winds are really cranked up in that area. In fact, we saw winds to 90 miles an hour this morning at St. Paul Island. This is a National Weather Service station. Near 100 miles an hour in gusts over that area. And this is post-tropical, not even hurricane anymore. This is basically becoming a cold core low over that area. So if you live up in these locales, please continue to take cover and stay inside, and know that the winds and everything are going to start to die down. But tonight, it's going to race off pretty fast to the north northeast, and conditions should start to improve. So going back to visible satellite, I'm going to go right to Ian, and I want to talk a little bit about its future track. So we're all watching what's going to be happening here with Tropical Storm Ian. Just became Tropical Storm overnight last night, and it will continue to go into an area with less upper shear. It's going to continue to strengthen and it's going to turn north. So the NHC's track does keep it eventually west and then turning to the northwest and eventually north across Cuba. And there's going to be some model consensus here, some consensus and disagreements in certain areas. And so the track at day 5 really is uncertain at this point. You really can't put everything at day 5 with the NHC because this kind of uncertainty, if you focus in the middle of the track at that point, you're leaving yourself for a really wide room of a margin of error. So you have to allow for some different placements to the west or to the east in time. But I'll go over the models here in just a second. I just want to show you these, the latest track from the NHC, which takes it just west of Jamaica. But the the Cayman Islands look like they're going to get the full brunt of a hurricane. So there's a hurricane watch up for them, and then they'll probably be elevated to a hurricane warning once the winds start to pick up. But the storm still has not gone fully to the west yet, and so it did have a lot of upper shear imparting on it from northeast to southwest, and we're starting to see that shear start to relax a little bit. And as it goes further west across the Caribbean into the central to western Caribbean, we're going to see that shear relax, and then all of a sudden it's going to become a more conducive environment for intensification for the system. So right now it's tropical storm at 45 miles per hour, but as it goes west, farther west, and then starts to turn to the northwest, it's going to start intensifying into a hurricane and then possibly even a major hurricane by the time it scrapes Cuba. And so the tracks on that really matter. And so here's where the upper shear is, the system being right here, and then you can see it's now moving into a more favorable environment with less upper shear. It's going to start to get its basically its convection is going to start becoming consolidated around the core. We're going to see a stronger low start to develop, and then things are going to really start to ramp up with the system. As far as tropical cyclone heat content in the ocean, this is measured by kilojoules per centimeter square, which is real mathematical, but really what it comes down to is it's moving into a warmer body of water. There's going to be more fuel at the surface for this system to feed off of. With little upper shear and very warm waters that go very deep down, there's no cool water upwelling expected as it moves over these waters. It's going to just become a heat engine and basically blow up. And so rapid intensification is not off the table for the system. Once it starts to turn north towards Cuba, it's going to ramp up pretty quickly. So the track of it really matters. If it goes west along the western end of Cuba, it has more of a chance to remain a strong hurricane. If it goes more to the east of the side over the mountainous areas, it may have a little bit of a weakening phase as it moves over those mountains and the core does. And so that's what we're kind of hoping will happen. But it looks like what the NHC is seeing that it's more of a westerly track. So even if the core now were to follow this track, if it were to slide a little farther west, we may even see the Yucatan Peninsula come into play here, right? And that's going to matter as far as where this storm goes north and hooks up towards the Florida coast. So we're looking anywhere from, Okaloosa all the way down to Miami. I mean, look at the wide girth of possibilities here with this track. I'm going to get right into that's the visible satellite IR loop where you can see the storm tops starting to rise and get stronger in time. So the convection's blowing up, and then we went over the shear and then okay. So here's also linked with the tropical cyclone heat potential. Look at the sea surface temperatures. It's moving to very warm waters according to our map here, and so they're expecting this to become a category 1 as early as tomorrow evening. So just in one day's time, it can go from 45 miles an hour to a hurricane, to a Cat 2, and then eventually to a Category 3 as we get into Tuesday. So this system's going to pick up a little bit of speed as it heads north, and that's due to an upper level trough digging down across the southeast United States. It's going to start to move it up to the northeast. If you look at the GFS ensembles, there's 21 members to this one, and you can see the kind of the wide girth of where they're going. These are even outliers that go across the Yucatan and into the Central Gulf. And then the other ones kind of go across southern Florida. So the mean here and the deterministic routes kind of show you down the middle kind of an idea of what the GEFS and the GFS ensemble is really thinking as it peels up. So that's kind of the spaghetti look from the ensemble from GFS. If you look at the Euro, most of the members are staying a little bit more to the east of where the GFS was. And so it's bringing it more into central and southern Florida. This is from the midnight run last night, and so there'll be another one at 12Z today or 12 o'clock p.m. And so we'll get a better idea of what that's going to do. But you can kind of see the differences, subtle differences between the GFS and the Euro, where the Euro keeps it a little more east and the GFS keeps it a little more west. So that's why the track in the NHC shows a wider girth once we get to Cuba. It's trying to accommodate for that. And it's not just, ingesting the Euro and the GFS, but those ensembles are hugely important in forecast tracks. There are other models to consider here as well, like the Icon and JMA and all the other ones that are also feeding into this. So if we look at Weather Geeks, I'll just show you the possibilities of low with the GFS mean. This is the ensembles, and I'm just going to push start. And you can see all the lows are pretty tight as we get into the Central and Western Caribbean. Then you start to see the split. And so these are all the different possibilities here, the 21 different possibilities of where the center of the storm could go. So just remember at day 3 beyond, there's going to be a higher margin of error there, and it's really tough to pin this down past day 3 and 4. It's a matter of where this storm turns and when, as far as, and then we'll have a much better idea. And these lows will probably start to tighten up in time. But here's the Euro. It's initialized a little farther to the east because of midnight, but you can see how they're a little bit tighter as they go over Cuba, and most of them still stay over western Cuba. You can see how they kind of stay a little bit tighter, but the wide girth is even from the Okaloosa area of Florida or the Big Bend, and then all the way around to down to Miami. So again, just showing you the different possibilities past day 3. So what's going to be the steering mechanism for the system? We look at the GFS deterministic at the 500 millibar height, and this basically represents troughing that's going on across the country. This is like a wind or an airstream avenue that's going across the country around a large upper low of the Great Lakes. And so this starts to tighten over time. And so as we go forward, we see that this trough really strengthens. It actually looks more like a jet streak at this point than anything else. And a lot of pilots, if you're in airplanes, they like to get into this to get faster travel across the Atlantic or across portions of the country. But either way, you can see where the system is coming, rounding Cuba with the GFS. Note the western side of Cuba, right? And so there's a ridge that's in the Gulf or an area of high pressure that's going to weaken. And this trough, even from this distance, there's going to be another area over in the Atlantic, this high pressure area that is showing that steering mechanism, which is nudging the storm to the north. It's going to start to feel that tug from the north as this trough digs down, and that's what's going to start to pull it and hook it into the northern Florida coast or even the central Florida coast and out towards the Atlantic. So this is the steering mechanism that we're watching with the GFS. If you notice with that, watch what happens here. This really gets reinforcement by Wednesday morning, and then it starts to weaken as we get into Thursday and it nears the coast of Florida. This is going to matter because if that happens, we have high pressure over Texas that may start to push down on this system and slow it down. And this could ultimately have an effect on where it makes landfall. So the GFS is reading a little more west in this particular instance, simply because that trough weakens by Wednesday, and then it eventually fizzles out, and then the storm just kind of follows around high pressure right up into the coastline and fizzles out. So that's just one of the deterministic roams, from 6 o'clock this morning, and it makes it very challenging when you see that. Now, if we look at the Euro, we look at when the storm's rounding Cuba. Here comes the trough digging down into Tuesday. Here comes the storm up from Cuba. And that takes it just a little further east than the GFS, but you can see the trough from the Euro digging down a little further. It goes down a little farther south. It starts to tug at the storm. Actually gets reinforced on Wednesday versus the GFS, which weakens. And then it actually helps pull the storm across Florida and over into the Atlantic. So beyond 3-4 days, as we see this storm, if it makes landfall or play out like this scenario, it's really tricky what happens at this point. We think that there's going to be weak high pressure to the north over the Ohio Valley that may keep this system south, and then it'll slowly fizzle over time. So that could bring impacts to the southeast region, and I'm going to go over those in just a little bit. But for right now, I think it's most important to understand that Florida's at the most risk at this point. And so you can anticipate, even with a major hurricane at Category 3, where these impacts are going to start to hit, like all the way from Sanibel up to Tampa Bay, even up to Clearwater. Even portions of the Keys could feel these hurricane force winds, because even though you see the track here, you got to think about what's the wider picture, even outside of the track where tropical storm force and hurricane force winds are going to occur. We don't have a surge product yet because it has not gotten within the 48-hour window, and they'll probably do that with the 3 days out once we get 3 days. So we'll see those products start to come out with the NHC and then the rainfall amounts will start to come out as well. It's just really unsure. We really got to find out which track this thing's going to take and when it's going to turn north. But as far as a major hurricane making landfall across Florida, yes, could it pop out in the Atlantic and take on tropical characteristics once again or maintain tropical characteristics? Yes. The impacts to the southeast are still widely unknown, but I do anticipate quite a bit of rainfall that comes over the area. Probably get some gusty winds and storms, especially if the winds are coming in from the southeast. So if we have counterclockwise rotation of the system, right, and you think about where this is at day 5, you start to see with that influx of energy, the Gulf moisture mixing with the Atlantic moisture coming up from the south and southeast and going over the coastline. That's going to quickly intensify rainfalls and heavy rainfalls into storms, maybe waterspout activity, and possibly a surge. But I think the surge is going to be largest over Florida. I'm a little concerned about it. If we end up with wraparound winds, where the winds are offshore from the east or the northeast, it could be a negative tide surge like we saw with Irma. If you remember Irma years ago. So it's really tricky. Depends on which way the winds are coming. If you get a nice wall of water building up from Cuba and going into the coastline, that could happen with a surge. But then again, if these winds are offshore like Irma was, then hey, we may not have that to deal with. But we did get a surge from Irma 300 miles away here in the Charleston area and most of the East Coast, all the way up to southeastern North Carolina from Georgia. We had a pretty big surge of 2 to 3 foot storm surge that actually occurred here from Irma, and it caused a lot of widespread flooding, and it actually made one of the records in the top 10. So just because it's that far away doesn't mean it can have long stretching impacts across the area. So I think with that, I'll go ahead and look at some questions, and I'm going to check my phone as well because sometimes Facebook on the PC doesn't always catch all the questions that come through. I find that the mobile function sometimes is a little bit better. I'm only seeing 7 comments right now. Let's see. I don't have any questions so far, but I think I think I've covered most of the topics. Again, we're just watching the NHC's forecast track to see which way the system's going to go, and it really matters how far west it goes in the Caribbean, and then how far when it starts to turn north. Again, the impacts that could affect the low country are very real. They could happen by late week. I think either way, if this system even ends up along the panhandle, up over to Okaloosa, we could still have impacts here in the southeast region, especially with that southerly draw coming up. Let's see, we got Grace and Wonder, we got Abby Thompson just tuning in. Sure, Abby, yep. And if you hop on late and you haven't caught the first 18 minutes of this live event, you can always go back and watch it once it ends. It takes a few minutes, several minutes for it to repopulate, and then it goes back out again as a video that you can actually watch. But as far as the interactive portion of it, I'm going to probably sign off here. I don't want to take too long because people start to drop off. But that's it for now. If we start to see that turn a little earlier, I might come back on later in the afternoon and go live. If not, it'll likely be tomorrow morning to go live again. Maybe tonight, depends on if the track and the storm intensifies a little earlier. Stephanie Skull asks in Charleston, heading to Ocean Isle. Okay, so Ocean Isle, I'm assuming North Carolina or Grand Strand. I'm thinking if that's Grand Strand, yeah, that the farther north you are away from the system, the better off. I think if right now we're looking at impacts for the low country for most of South Carolina, and that could spread up to the Grand Strand. But the majority of the impacts once it crosses Florida are going to start affecting Georgia and southern or southeastern South Carolina, or southwestern quadrant of South Carolina for that matter. And that's kind of what we're looking at. I mean, I don't think much is going to head to the Grand Strand. They may get some, outside tropical storm force winds from some of the storms or squalls that come through there, but it's still too early to tell. Until we get this storm moving north and heading across Cuba, we'll have a much better idea of what the forecast track is going to be. And again, it really matters what this upper troughing is going to do. So this is the steering mechanism that's going to pull it to the north. And that's not if the Texas high suppresses it and slows it down to the south first and gives this trough enough time to fade and fizzle out, then that steering mechanism is no longer there and it's being steered by Atlantic high pressure all the way up, and it just bink goes right up and fizzles out. And again, the Euro showing that trough, digging in, being reinforced, and actually becoming more of a sting jet, and then it has much more of a pull to it. Even from a distance, it can pull. That Texas ridge on the Euro is not as well pronounced, and then it goes across Florida and then possibly over into the Atlantic. So again, these are just a combination of one model run from deterministics, and I'm continuing to watch the ensemble runs and everything else. But there's a lot of science built into all the track forecasting, but the main thing you want to think about is just going to nhc.gov and you can see the latest information here. There are other products available, but it's really kind of, we're going to see these rainfalls increase. And this is just day 1 through 3. So once we get to days 4, 5, 6, and 7, you're going to see these maps populate and you're going to see heavier rain starting to spread across Florida for sure. Because either way, that eastern side of the storm is probably going to be packing the most punch as far as I'm concerned, unless it really becomes more symmetrical in shape. I usually see these systems when they come up from the south like that, their eastern side really packs the most punch in. So head to the nhc.gov to check out what the latest is for the official information. Those update every 3 hours, 11 a.m., 2 p.m., 5 p.m., 8 p.m., and then that'll give you the latest forecast track. I'll be updating on my page with different posts, and if there are going to be any immediate threats to the Charleston area that we know about and we can actually discuss in more detail, you will hear it here first. And outside of that, everybody, thanks a lot for watching, and I will either be back on tomorrow after or later today or even tomorrow morning. So as the threat continues to increase, I'll be going live more and more to talk about those, and I'll be with you the whole time. Thanks, everyone. Y'all have a good day.